Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to speak to you about one of the world's oldest nations, Egypt. When we think of Egypt, often the first thing that comes to mind is the ancient world. We may think about pharaohs, mummies, pyramids, and hieroglyphs. Also, upon hearing the word Egypt, we might think about the Bible. Egypt is mentioned a number of times in the Old Testament, for example. On the other hand, however, when hearing about this part of the world, some people may immediately think about the geography of this Middle Eastern country. They might think of how Egypt borders Israel and the Gaza Strip, and the consequence that this has nowadays on Egyptian current affairs and politics. They might also think about the River Nile upon hearing the word Egypt, a river which has been a key source of water in the region for several millennia. They may also be reminded of the geographical importance of the Suez Canal. Alternatively, one might remember visits to the country as a tourist. As well as the pyramids and the ancient sites of interest, Egypt boasts some of the best places in the world to go scuba diving. These sites are located in the Red Sea. However, over the last couple of years, upon hearing the name Egypt, many different words and images come to mind among most people. They tend to be related to the recent unrest that the country has seen, and in particular the revolution which took place in 2011. This uprising was part of a series of protests that were sparked off in Tunisia, and which are now known as the Arab Spring. As a result of the unrest, President Hosni Mubarak was forced out of power. The focal point of the protests was Tahrir Square. The protests have now brought about many changes in political life in Egypt, and I will go into further details about these later on. Now, on the other hand, I would like to speak to you very briefly about the history of Egypt over the last 150 years. Now, of course, one cannot analyze Egypt's history without speaking about the River Nile. But there is also one other waterway which is central to the country's past, and I mentioned this earlier, the Suez Canal. The canal was opened in November 1869 and took 10 years to build. It allows transportation by water between Europe and Asia without the need to sail around Africa. The canal is over 193 kilometers long. It is 24 meters deep and 205 meters wide. It was originally envisaged as a way of making Egypt the world hub of global shipping. However, the plans that the Egyptians had for the canal were soon stalled. Shortly after its construction, the canal drew the interests of the imperial powers. Countries like Britain and France were seeking a shorter route to their eastern colonies. The British Navy eventually found an excuse to bombard Alexandria and thus make Egypt a British protectorate. This meant that the country spent a number of years under British control. In 1919, a nationwide revolt took place, but the British presence continued. It was not until the 1950s that the British finally left Egypt for good. This took place when Gamal Abdel Nasser was in power, a leader who fiercely defended Egypt's national interests. Nasser has been described as the first leader of an Arab nation to challenge Western dominance of the Middle East. Nasser was succeeded by Anwar Sadat, who became the third president of Egypt. Sadat was highly respected for winning back Egyptian territory from Israel in the October War of 1973. He gained further respect as a result of his negotiations with Israel. These negotiations led to a peace treaty, and this meant that Anwar Sadat was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. Sadat ruled for a total of 11 years before being assassinated by Islamists in 1981. The next man to take charge of the country was to be Hosni Mubarak, whose name is now, of course, very familiar to all of us. Like his two predecessors, Mubarak had a military background. He monopolized political life and modified the constitution in order to stay in power. The brutality of Mubarak's authorities also helped him to keep a firm grip on control over the country. In January 2011, Egyptians took to the streets to demand Mubarak's resignation after 30 years in office. On the 11th of February 2011, Mubarak stepped down. This took place after 18 days of continuous protests across the country. The unrest involved thousands of deaths and arrests. Following the toppling of Mubarak, elections were organized. The result was that the Islamists gained a majority in the parliament, and the winner of the presidential elections was from among the Muslim Brotherhood. This new president, who is in power today, is Mohamed Morsi. Although Morsi came to lead the country as a consequence of the revolution, many of the protesters feel that Morsi represents political views which are completely different to the ideas that drove the revolution. The revolution was initially led by activists with progressive views, but Morsi stands for a more conservative and Islamist outlook. Unfortunately, the revolution has not brought about many improvements in key problematic areas. Unemployment is still high, and many young people feel that the future is bleak for them. The current government seems to be showing authoritarian tendencies, which are similar to those shown by Mubarak's administration. However, one positive repercussion of the 2011 uprising is that people are now more aware of the changes that they can bring about themselves. The Egyptian people are now less willing to accept the abuses of power they saw in the past, and are now more willing to stand up for what they believe in without fearing for their lives. However, it seems that Egypt is now going through a transitional period that will last for a long time to come. The country is far from being free from the unrest that has been shaking the country for over 2 years now. Therefore, it seems that those who took to the streets in 2011 will have to show a great deal of patience before their demands are finally met. Let's hope that in the meantime, the violence comes to an end. Thank you.